So the planes hit the buildings, and one hit in about the 80th to 90th floor, and one hit a little bit lower or higher, I can't remember exactly, but after they had been burning for a while, the weight of the top part of it collapsed the bottom part of it. And a lot of people didn't know when the first plane hit, they thought it was an accident, they thought it was just like a miscommunication with a tower somewhere, but then when the second plane hit, everybody knew that that was for real. And people didn't really know what to do. Everybody stopped in the street, so that car behind the guy in the blue shirt is just stopped. A lot of the traffic just stopped, and people just stood outside their cars and watched because they didn't know exactly what to do or what was going to happen next. So after about a while, the first building collapsed, and I wrote stories of fear because that's what you started feeling after a certain point. Everybody, those phones were kind of the phones that most people have, those little phones, and in New York City, there are 12 million people there during the working day. There's 8 million people who actually live there. There are 12 million people who come in during the workday. Everybody was using their phone at the same time, and that was in an age where the cell phone towers were not all using satellite and not as spread out as they are now. It jammed up everything. So, like, I didn't talk to my parents probably for a day, day and a half after that. They were trying to call to make sure everything was okay, and I couldn't get a signal. I couldn't get out calling from this huge metropolitan area because everyone was on their phones. The people who could get through were starting to find out that this Pentagon had been attacked, and they started saying Pentagon, Pentagon, and we were all wondering what the heck was going on. So the fear was really, you didn't know what was next. You didn't know, there was a lot of rumors. There's like another plane coming from New York. Is there something else going to happen here? There's something on the subway. No one knew. We were all just sort of in a wait and see kind of a situation. The second thing that made things really scary was we started seeing people as these buildings collapsed walk up from ground zero who had been either around the buildings or had gotten out of the buildings, and they were covered in like dirt and debris. And from all the demolition, it was like a demolition scene when these huge 100-story buildings fell down. There was a lot of concrete flying up in the air, there's a lot of debris, and people were covered in it. And they were walking up from ground zero kind of like zombies, just wondering what to do. They really didn't know. There were some people who jumped from the top stories of the building because when they found out the planes had hit in the middle of the building, they didn't know how to get out. And they knew that the fire exits were all burning, and they knew that paramedics and firefighters couldn't get up to the top of the building, and they were 100 stories up. So we started hearing those types of stories, and that kind of increased the fear level too. And it was average people. It was people like you and me. It wasn't people who were trained for combat. It wasn't people who had a specialized skill for this. It was people just going to work and having a regular day. So all the hospitals around us started pulling out those beds and just leaving them in the street so that anybody who was walking up from ground zero could just fall into a bed and get wheeled to a hospital. They didn't ask any questions. If you had any kind of trauma from the attack that day, there were a ton of people ready to help. First responders were huge. We'll talk about that later. But everybody had to wear these masks. So that's one of my friends on the right there, and she's got a mask on. And we had to wear all different types of masks. You guys can pass these around, but they're kind of like surgical masks. And that was because there was so much debris and dirt in the air. There was a fear that breathing a lot of that in would start making people sick. Asbestos is something that is a chemical that's released during demolitions, during construction site kinds of things. And people thought that there was going to be so much of this in the air that they'd get sick. So NYU passed out a lot of these types of masks for us to wear in the immediate couple of weeks after that. How people responded, it was really all different ways. That picture on the top left is all the people that were near me on that corner for the rest of the morning. It was people who were working, it was people who had stores and businesses around there, it was some students, it was some parents taking their kids places. Everyone just stopped and waited because they didn't really know what to do, and it wasn't an easy way to communicate with people. First responders, the firefighters, EMS, emergency teams, and police were awesome. So as everybody is leaving ground zero, which is what that was called, the area where it actually happened when the towers fell, as everybody was walking north from that, you saw trucks and firefighters and police just like racing south. And they were going into the fire. So there was a lot of them that went in when the planes hit the buildings, trying to get people out, and then they ended up dying in the collapses too. But they were awesome that day because they were the only ones who were going in the opposite direction of all the traffic, which is a very heroic thing. This picture on the right is some of my friends on Broadway. If you've ever seen a picture of Broadway on the news or on TV or gone there, it is always like jammed up with traffic, right? There's always cabs everywhere, there's always honking, there's a ton of lights. For about 3 weeks to a month after September 11th, there was no cars on Broadway at all, ever. We even organized like a flag football game here one day because we were like, when are we ever going to play football on Broadway again? We're never going to do that. It was like walking through a horror movie to see. It was dead silence on that street. So that was a picture of Broadway just right after that happened. So what you soon saw after that, in the aftermath, was probably the most inspiring thing I've ever seen. It was a lot of patriotism. It was a lot of candlelight vigils. It was a lot of memorials. It was a lot of "Have you seen me?" Like people were still looking for some loved ones who might be trapped in the buildings or in the rubble. It was a lot of motivational, inspirational symbols, and it was a lot of unity. So it was probably the first thing in my generation that I can think of where people started identifying with each other and caring about each other as Americans, no matter where you came from. And it didn't matter because New York was the most diverse city in the world. But we connected on that one simple thing that we had this shared experience, and that made you care about that person next to you more than you probably did on September 10th. And it's a really hard thing to describe, and it's hard to just say, hey, everybody go care about a person, because there's something that's got to make you do that sometimes. But that was that day, and there was so much of an outpouring of support. It was pretty incredible. And that optimism turned to patriotism and hope for something better. So that blanket on the bottom left was knit by a school that was a little grade school that was evacuated because it was kind of in the shadow of the towers on that morning. It's just a quilt that they knit for the people, the survivors. There's a flag of honor that lists all the people who died, which is this. I'll pass this around too. The New York City Council passed this out. It lists all the people that died. That flag was everywhere after September 11th, all over the city, probably not even all over the city, probably elsewhere too. And every street that you went to, and that was even near my parents' house in Montgomery, had American flags like lining the streets, and it was like that for months. And it was an incredible patriotic thing to witness, because I'd never seen anything like that before. You think about like World War II and times when America's been really patriotic, and that was a time like that. You couldn't go by anybody's house, no matter what their background was or what their political party was, and not see some kind of an American flag or a symbol of our country. And that was just an incredibly inspiring thing also. And then the final thing was memorialization. How do you remember this 14 years later? You know, what do you do? For about 6 months to a year after 9/11, they were trying to figure out what they wanted to build here. So a couple designers said, in the meantime, we're going to put these two huge, incredibly powerful lights to shoot straight upwards where the towers used to be. And we're going to beam them from sundown to sunup every night so that everybody will know that we remember this day. That was probably one of the most powerful, I guess most sad and most amazing things I've ever seen, was those lights. And it was just such an infinite symbol of togetherness and remembrance, and that was a great thing that happened in New York after that. And of course now we have the Freedom Tower, which is 1,776 feet tall, and that stands where Ground Zero was. So that was kind of my experience in the city during 9/11, and that's the only reason I tell it to you. I don't tell it to you to scare anyone or make you think of all the bad things. Just as a reminder of what happened, and as a remembrance that you will have a day in your life, whether that's happened or whether it will happen in the future, that everything stops and starts on that day. You think of everything that happened before and everything that happens after based on that one day.